Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and keep watching more details. Why 2025's One Chicago crossover starts with fire instead of med. The One Chicago franchise has an important reason for airing Chicago Fire before Chicago Med during the 2025 One Chicago crossover. The franchise typically airs standalone episodes of each show, with Chicago Med airing at 8 ET on Wednesday nights, followed by Chicago Fire and Chicago PD. One Chicago crossovers usually involve each segment of the show dealing with a different aspect of the same case. However, the shows are broadcast as separate segments rather than one 3-hour show during these special events. Crossovers used to be a regular event, but Dick Wolf Entertainment paused them after the COVID lockdowns because of safety concerns related to the pandemic. Thus, the 2025 special is the first One Chicago crossover in 5 years. This 3-part story will feature the characters from Chicago Med, Chicago Fire, and Chicago PD working together after a gas explosion at a government building leads to a mass casualty event. The crossover event, titled In the Trenches, has led to a scheduling change for Chicago Fire and Chicago Med on Wednesday, January 29. Instead of Chicago Med kicking off the evening, the story will begin with an episode of Chicago Fire, with the franchise's medical drama taking the middle time slot. Chicago PD will air last, as it does normally. This One Chicago schedule change is for this week only. The shows will return to their regular time slots on February 5. These types of schedule changes are common during crossover episodes. The first One Chicago crossover to feature all 3 shows also had Chicago Fire air before Chicago Med, as did the most recent crossover in 2019. There have also been several crossovers involving only Chicago Fire and Chicago PD, some of which began on the police drama rather than sticking to the regular schedule. These schedule changes are made to accommodate stories that begin at Firehouse 51 or at the police station and continue in the other One Chicago shows. In the case of the 2025 One Chicago crossover, the story begins when Firehouse 51 gets a call related to a gas explosion. Thus, Chicago Fire airs first since the call is a typical story for the fire and rescue series. Telling the story this way is more logical. While the call will lead to a mass casualty event, Gaffney Medical Center won't need to treat victims until after the rescue workers have gotten them safely out of the affected area. If Chicago Med were to air first, the story of the rescue would have to be told via flashbacks, which would be a more confusing way to tell the story. The description for 2025's One Chicago crossover fits the pattern of many of these joint stories. Previous crossovers involve Firehouse 51 getting a call, leading to the need for the doctors on Chicago Med to treat patients and the police to get involved with finding the people responsible for creating a life-threatening disaster. The format leads to exciting stories that explain logically why all 3 shows are involved with the same case. Chicago Fire almost always airs first during such events, so it is not surprising that the schedule has been changed for the latest crossover. For years, One Chicago crossovers have captivated fans with high-stakes drama spanning Chicago Fire, Chicago PD, and Chicago Med. Traditionally, the crossovers often begin with Chicago Med, setting the stage for the chaos to unfold as first responders and law enforcement get pulled into the fray. However, in 2025, the game changes. The highly anticipated crossover starts with Chicago Fire. This decision is not just a creative shakeup, but a deliberate choice that elevates the storytelling and raises the stakes like never before. A fire that changes everything. The opening hour of the 2025 One Chicago crossover doesn't ease into the drama, it ignites it. Firehouse 51 is called to a massive blaze at a high-rise in downtown Chicago, an inferno so intense that it quickly becomes one of the most challenging calls of their careers. The twist? This isn't just a routine fire. It's a targeted act of arson that ties into a larger criminal conspiracy. By launching with Chicago Fire, the event pulls viewers in with immediate, heart-pounding action. Flames engulf multiple floors, forcing our beloved firefighters to make split-second life-or-death decisions. Bowden takes command in the chaos. Severide and Kidd lead the charge in the fire's most dangerous points, and Kraz faces an unthinkable choice when he discovers victims trapped between the inferno and a collapsed stairwell. with Casey making a special return for this event. His presence only raises the emotional stakes. A crime in the flames. It soon becomes clear that this fire wasn't accidental, it was set to cover up something sinister. During the rescue efforts, Kid and Gallo stumble upon a locked office door that firefighters aren't typically concerned with. But inside, they find a chilling scene, a body already lifeless before the fire even reached it. The victim appears to have been executed. This revelation immediately shifts the event from a standard rescue operation to a crime scene, demanding the involvement of Chicago PD. Intelligence takes over. As Chicago Fire transitions into Chicago PD, Voight and his team arrive on the scene, pushing the case into high gear. The arson was just the beginning. Someone went to great lengths to make sure the body was never found. And worse, there are signs that the crime is tied to a larger network of organized crime, potentially even corrupt officials working within the city's own government. Halstead, returning temporarily for this crossover, works alongside Upton to track down witnesses, while Burgess and Atwater dig into surveillance footage that shows suspicious movements in the building before the fire. Ruzek, deep undercover in an ongoing operation, starts to connect dots between this case and a long-running investigation into a powerful criminal syndicate. As they begin unraveling the truth, they find themselves in a race against time, because someone is willing to silence anyone who knows too much. The medical fallout. It's only in the final act of the crossover that Chicago Med takes center stage. Unlike past crossovers where the hospital kicks things off with an influx of patients, this time the medical drama plays the crucial role of dealing with the devastating aftermath. Victims from the fire, including firefighters, civilians, and even suspects, flood the emergency department. The staff at Chicago Med faces ethical dilemmas as they treat those who may have been behind the very crime that started it all. Dr. Halstead finds himself at odds with a patient he believes is involved in the arson, but can't yet prove. Dr. Marcel, dealing with critical burn victims, struggles with his own past trauma related to fire rescues. Dr. Archer, always one to challenge protocol, makes a controversial call that could have lasting consequences for the case. Meanwhile, Maggie and Goodwin attempt to manage the overwhelming influx of patients while keeping the hospital safe from potential outside threats. The storytelling impact. By reversing the usual order and launching with Chicago Fire, the 2025 crossover delivers an immediate adrenaline rush that hooks viewers right from the start. It also allows Chicago PD to take the baton seamlessly, making the case more of a slow burn, pun intended, investigative thriller rather than something that's dumped on the intelligence unit's lap. The shift in structure gives Chicago Med a unique role. Rather than being the initial exposition dump, it becomes the emotional and ethical anchor of the story, where the personal consequences of the fire and the crime finally hit home. This choice enriches the medical drama's presence in the crossover, giving it stakes that extend beyond just treating the wounded. A new standard for One Chicago events. The decision to start the 2025 One Chicago crossover with Chicago Fire isn't just a gimmick, it's a statement. It signals that these crossovers are evolving, finding new ways to engage audiences and tell more immersive, multi-layered stories. It also provides a well-earned spotlight on the firefighters of 51, showing how their heroism doesn't just begin and end with fighting fires, but with being the first line of defense in protecting Chicago. With shocking twists, character returns, and a narrative structure that keeps audiences on the edge of their seats, this year's One Chicago crossover proves that sometimes it's best to start with the spark before fanning the flames into a full-blown storm.